Sailboat hardware designed and manufactured by Harken Incorporated has been used in Olympic competition and aboard yachts contending for the America's Cup. Company co-founder Peter Harken is my special guest next on I Remember. Hi, I'm Jim Peck. Welcome to I Remember. Joining me tonight is Peter Harken, chairman of Harken Incorporated. More than 40 years ago, he began a business adventure with his brother Olaf. It all started with their love for sailing. Take a look.
Peter and Olaf Harken turned their passion for sailing into a business in 1967. Peter had already designed an innovative new sailing block, incorporating plastic ball bearings in the pulley. It was a small operation when Peter Barrett and Lowell North won gold Olympic medals using Harken gear. The new business also started making sailboats, marketed to colleges under the Vanguard name. Vanguard built Olympic fin sailboats, and young people around the world have learned to sail in a Vanguard Optimist. In the 1980s, the Harkens sold Vanguard to concentrate on their sailing hardware. Their products include blocks, travelers, furling systems, and winches. America's Cup contenders have used hardware made by Harken, including winners Buddy Melgis and Sir Peter Blake. Harken has supplied boats in transatlantic competition and the catamaran team adventure in a non-stop race around the globe. Today, Harken is a leading manufacturer of sailboat hardware, used in everything from the smallest boats to mega yachts. Shoes, clothing, and sailing accessories are marketed through Harken Sport. Headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Harken has manufacturing facilities in the U.S. and Italy, as well as offices in 48 countries.
You met one of my heroes, Sir Edmund Hillary.
Yes.
What was he like?
Amazing guy. Like I say, I've got two heroes. Ernst Shackleton, the Antarctic guy, and Edmund Hillary, two amazing men. And during the America's Cup in Australia, when Australia took it away from us, and then it went to Perth, Australia, the skipper, John Bertrand, who won, the Australian skipper who won the Cup from the Americans in 1983, was a good friend of mine because he actually lived in Milwaukee working for North Sails out there for some time. And he was holding a special party reception for all the skippers of the America's Cup. Kind of a posh deal, you know, to get dressed up and so on. And so he invited me, even though I wasn't part of that group, because we were the guys who provide gear and fix things and so on. So I wasn't quite in that element, you know. Anyway, I was at his house, and everything was going on in there, and I knew the skippers went around, but you know, there were a lot of high egos going on in there, and I got a little tired of it. So I thought I'd start wandering through John's house. And as I was wandering through the house, there was a room. As I passed by, and I noticed there was kind of an older guy sitting there, but a very big man, you know, big guy, on a couch, being very quiet. And I walked by him, and then I came back, and he was there, and I really didn't want to go back in the room, so I walked over to where he was sitting, and I said, gee, look, I'm sorry, I don't want to bother you. If you'd rather be alone, I'll leave, but if you don't mind, I'd just as soon sit down here and so on. And he said, no, son, he said, go ahead, sit down, it's fine, I'd like some company. And I said, well, gee, thanks very much. And then I introduced myself. I said, well, my name's Peter Harken, and so on. And I said, what's your name? And he just kind of sheepishly said, well, it's Ed. That's all he said.
Really? Ed?
And I said, well, nice to meet you, Ed. You know, we shook hands. And I was sitting there for a minute and kind of looking at him. And all of a sudden, my stomach started to stir a little bit because I'd read all about Hillary. And I'm kind of looking at him, and we were quiet, and he's kind of got his eyes on the floor. And I finally said, excuse me, I said, would it by any chance be, because I'm thinking, what's this guy, kind of scruffy looking guy, he isn't dressed like the other, doing here in this fancy party with all these big names? And then I looked at his face and everything, and I went, oh my God. So I went, by any chance would it be Sir Edmund? And he said, well, I guess so. And then I looked and I went, Sir Edmund Hillary? And he said, I guess so. And with that, I just jumped up in the air. You know, holy, I won't say the word.
Thank you.
Holy cow, you know, but a little different word.
Yes.
And I mean, I don't know how high I leaped. I said, Sir Edmund Hillary. And he jumps up and he grabs me. He said, calm down, son, calm down. Sit down, take it easy. And I said, my God, man. I said, what are you doing in here? I said, you'd be the star out there. I mean, you're more famous than all those guys put together. He says, well, it's not my kind of crowd. I'm not really into that. And so I said, well, I'm not either right now. I said, you want to talk about something? And he said, yeah, I like that. And I asked him about what he did after Mount Everest with, and I knew all about it, about his, that he gave away all of his money and fame to building schools and hospitals in Nepal, to give back to Nepal what he had taken.
And he turned out to be
fantastic.
An easy person to talk to.
Wonderful guy. I mean, the guy just, you know, wonderful. And you know, when he died, they gave him a full state funeral in New Zealand, like the president and so on. The country loved him. Amazing guy.
Let's go back a little bit. Was there a big break for Harken Incorporated that comes to mind?
I would say our break came in the 1968 Olympics at Acapulco, when the hardware I'd made, our ball-bearing blocks, so on, was a breakthrough at the time, but we didn't know it. You know, it's just machine making them, and I'd made them in college. And I had tried out for the Olympic sailing team, didn't make it, but knew all the guys, you know, and they had seen my pulleys, which we call blocks in the sailing world, and asked if I would make them some, because they knew that they ran a lot better. And I said, sure. So I was machine making them for the guys and pretty much outfitted our Olympic team with them.
Wow.
And 2 of the boats got gold medals in the games back then. And then the Europeans that were all over there came by and saw these strange looking black blocks with white plastic balls in them. And
what made them different? I'm not a sailor, so I don't understand.
Well, back in those days and before that, pulleys, if they had to be low friction, they used metal bearings in them. You know, metal roller bearings or ball bearings. Today, the same thing. They're either encased in a casing, and they're either ball or roller bearing or a combination. But they're always metal. We were actually kind of the first to use a plastic. And the reason is, it was a mistake. I wasn't from brains. When I was going to UW in Madison, you know, as a student, you don't have any money. So I had to make my own, in sailing, I had to make my own hardware and couldn't afford to buy it, and made my own boats. And I worked for a company called Gilson Medical Electronics to earn money through school. I kind of had to, because good old Dad cut me off when I was screwing around too much in college.
You were not an ideal student.
I was not. University of Wisconsin-Madison has got more diversions than any, I think, school in the nation. I mean,
And you made use of all of them.
Sporting, I mean, everything, you know, and a lot of sports, a lot of outdoor activities and so on, skiing and ice sports, I mean, everything. And I believe I found every darn one of them, you know. And I think I only went to class as a diversion to see what it was like.
I see.
When I got bored with screwing around. So, and needless to say, my grades showed it, you know. They were inversely proportional to the amount of time I was screwing around.
And your father took note of this.
Yeah, he.
Well, didn't you start on a scholarship?
Yeah, I was just, you know, start a little bit from the beginning. Always people wonder where we're from, and I said, well, I've had a very normal childhood. I was born in Indonesia, raised in the Philippines, and I end up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Well, as long as you've raised the point of Indonesia and the Philippines, you had kind of a harrowing experience back then.
Yeah, we were. My father was Dutch, you know. My mother was Swedish, and back then it was the Dutch East Indies. Indonesia was, and back. I was born in 1937, so I'm a pretty old guy, you know. And I was born in Java, and my father worked for Caterpillar. He was the agent for Caterpillar out there. And our heritage is pretty neat in a way because my grandfather, Dutch grandfather, owned a whole fleet of ships at the time.
Really?
And my father had worked on them and so on. That's where our sailing came from. But the Germans took care of that in the Second World War. I mean, so we lost everything on the Dutch side. And Swedish side was neutral, and that's where my mother was from.
But you were in a bad place at a bad time.
Yeah,
because the Japanese came in.
Yeah, we got hit by the Japanese, invaded, and so we spent some time there during the bombing and the you know, the fighting and stuff like that, and trying to escape it and dance around it and so on. And you know, it's kind of funny as a kid. To me, it was like a great adventure, but it's so dependent on your parents. You know, I think the way you grow up and the way you end up is real direct reflection from your parents. And mine were really strong. They were of that Tom Brokaw's greatest generation. They truly were. They were the epitome of it. And they never showed fear, even though there was, you know. So they didn't show fear. So as a 4-year-old kid, we didn't show fear. We just went, wow, you know, what's all this stuff coming around our ears?
Wow.
You know, and we were getting pretty heavily bombed and so on. But we managed to escape to Borneo. It was actually American C-47, the Army Air Corps guys who were volunteered. U.S. wasn't in the war at the time, but these were volunteer guys coming with C-47s or DC-3s at the time, and they were landing and taxiing on the runway. They never stopped, and we were driven out. Women and children were being evacuated and driven out in trucks. And I can still remember my father. I was the last one picking me up and just heaving me into the plane.
Wow. And
I can still remember an American soldier jumping on top of me and holding me down as we took off with all the flak and firepower going by the plane and stuff.
But now, your dad did not get on the plane.
No, the Dutch guys, civilians there, the Dutch army was very small, and they elected to stay behind and help fight. And he did a lot of demolition and stuff, like a Shell oil refinery and so on. The only thing bad about that is when the Japanese did catch those guys, they weren't treated under the Geneva Convention. They would call them treason, and they were all killed. They were shot. Well, my mother never knew through the whole war years whether he was alive because of that. But he and a friend who was working with him in the demolition found a couple of dead Dutch soldiers in a machine gun nest and took their uniforms, and then finally had to surrender, and they surrendered as soldiers. So they were then put into a Japanese prison camp.
Wow.
And the
How long was he in the camp?
The full duration. And the camps in Indonesia were really bad. In Malaysia, they were brutal. Only 30% of the prisoners survived the camp. And he was the last living survivor of the camp.
Really?
Yeah.
Did he ever talk much about it?
No, it was hard. We should have dragged it out, you know. And I would tell every kid or people who've got their parents alive, drag their stories out. Don't wait until they're gone, because you're going to miss a great deal.
But that was typical of that generation, where they came home, closed up the bag, and that was it.
No, and you know, when he was finally rescued by young American paratroopers, and the end of the war, and somehow in the meantime, my brother, my mother, and I, we escaped to Borneo, and then we were transshipped into Wellington, New Zealand. We were there for a year, and then shipped into Melbourne, Australia, and we were there for a year. And then
not having any word about your father.
No, my mother never knew. And but she kept the faith, and she always made us feel like everything's fine. He's a prisoner, but he's fine. And we were finally reunited in San Francisco. We were transshipped from Australia to San Francisco on a big troop ship with wounded soldiers, almost torpedoed by a Japanese submarine, but he was a nice captain. As he was looking at us, I can remember being on deck with life jackets and waiting for the torpedo to come, but I think he saw the wounded soldiers, the women and the kids, and he was really a decent guy, and he finally just periscoped down and away he went. So, but we were reunited. Somehow they found him, and they got us together, Red Cross and the Dutch legation, and I can still remember his words after the hugging and the kissing when he got off the plane. He was a scarecrow. And he just said, put his arms around us, and he just said, well, war is hell, life's not always fair, let's get on with it. And he never looked back.
Really?
And he refused Japanese reparations. He said, no, this is history, it's the times. He said, I happen to be born in it, what can you do?
How did you get to Wisconsin? What was the draw that got you out of San Francisco?
We were in the U.S. for a little while with Caterpillar, and then my dad got an offer to do reconstruction in the Philippines, Manila.
Back to the Philippines?
Yeah, right back into a war zone, you know, because the Battle of Manila was really bad, and it flattened the city, you know, and the whole thing. And so he was offered to go out there with big heavy-duty earth-moving equipment and do reconstruction and building mines and so on. And they always liked the Far East, and he goes right back into a war zone. I never did understand that, you know. But that's the way they were. And he gave us a wonderful life. They were amazing.
Let me jump back to what you were talking about a minute ago before we got into this, and that was being at the University of Wisconsin and having a lot of fun.
What happened when I graduated from high school in the Philippines, we were looking at colleges, and I didn't get in college in brains. You know what's wonderful about an American university versus any other university in the world is you can get in if you don't have a brain in your head, but you're a good athlete. So that's how I got in. I was a good swimmer. My brother was too. So I got a scholarship to go to Wisconsin on swimming, and my brother got one to Georgia Tech on swimming. But then, of course, you got to stay in, okay?
Yeah, so you were having too much
fun.
You
got to study, you got to do it, yeah. Well, no, I didn't get thrown out, okay, but I was screwing around a lot, and then I went ski bumming in Aspen, Colorado. I wanted to learn how to really ski. You know, I'd never lived in a land of ice and snow, and I come to Wisconsin, and here are all these great winter sports, you know, ice skating and skiing and ski jumping, tried some of that, and ice sailing and so on, and I really got to like it. People kind of wonder, God, you lived all your life in your tropics and you like this kind of weather. Well, I think that's my Swedish and Dutch heritage, you know, was in there. There was cold blood in there.
Well, didn't ice boating cause you some problems?
Oh, yeah. It's pretty wild sport, you know, and it's fast. I mean, ice boats will do 50, 60 miles an hour. And, I mean, 5 to 6 times the speed of the wind. So, and the ones I've sailed and raced will easily get to 100 and 120 miles an hour. So it's like a car. If you hit something or something goes wrong, you know, the body can't take that kind of punishment. And yeah, I've been in 3 big crashes and lots of busted bones and stuff like that.
Oh, that little thing.
Yeah, right. But it's a real adrenaline driving sport while you can do it, you know, and it's pretty neat. I mean, you're just pushed by the wind and you're going at these speeds, and there's no sound of an engine or anything. Very noisy because of the ice and the wind and screaming in your ears and stuff like that. But it's pretty adrenaline driven.
Well, you like that sort of thing. Didn't you do a snowmobiling event or a feat of some sort?
That was up in Finland. Our Finnish agent's crazy guy. He, funny, really funny guy. He well, probably about 4 years ago. He said, why don't you come high-speed snowmobiling up in northern Finland? And I thought, that sounds pretty
Sure,
neat.
why not?
And believe it or not, it was up by the Arctic Circle. We're only a couple of 100 miles from the North Pole, and there's nothing up there. I mean, it is nothing, you know. But the Finnish government's built all these trails for cross-country skiing and snowmobiling, thousands and thousands of miles of trails up there. And so that's what they do. And you fly up during the night. The Finnish pilots are in DC-9s coming in full blizzard in weather they'd shut our airports down, you know. And these guys like to do it at night because at night, with their lights and so on, and the airport lights, they can tell the difference. There's shadows and stuff. Well, in the day, it's total whiteout.
Wow. So what does that feel like when you're going on a snowmobile in the Arctic Circle?
Yeah, well, it's pretty neat, actually. You know, I love the harsh northern beauty of a winter beauty. It's very different. There's nothing. There's no animals even. It's too cold. It's too desolate. And at night, it's like you're in space. There is no sound, nothing. You don't hear a thing. It's really weird. You feel like you're in space. But the sky, the stars, I mean, you see the whole universe. And we would do night snowmobiling too, again, so we could see the bumps and stuff as we're going. And but if you ever missed a corner and went off trail, you were buried under 6-7 feet of snow. The snow is so light, there's no moisture.
That ever happened to you?
Oh yeah.
Oh really?
But you know, the Finns invented the cell phone, Nokia. Finland has never been wired. The distances were too far apart and too few people. And before the cell phone, they used walkie-talkies, radios. And so along came the cell phone. They have cell phone towers all over northern Finland, up by the Arctic Circle, nowhere. And one time when I was buried under the snow with a machine on top of me and I was waiting for guys to come and get me, I decided to try out my cell phone and I called my buddy here in Milwaukee. And I'm telling you, it was like you and I talking, it was that clear.
Is there any way of explaining what it feels like to see a yacht win the America's Cup using your equipment?
Yeah, well, a big sigh of relief, because during the whole time, before they won it, and during the racing, and the training periods and so on, we can't afford to have our equipment go down. If our equipment breaks during a race, they can lose the America's Cup. One race, an equipment failure, can lose millions and millions of dollars of investment and so on. And every time the boats went out with all of our gear, I would sit on pins and needle, because there's no guarantee that it's not going to break or something, because we have to build them, you know, as light as we can. We build it right to the nth degree, not like you would for gear for ocean racing boats and so on, where you put safety factors in there, big ones. Not these.
These don't have that.
They want them as light as they can, the highest performance. So we build them right to the bone. And during training and stuff, yes, the stuff breaks, but we have time to fix it, and we increase it a little bit, you know, make it a little stronger, just keep inching it up to where it lasts. And but when you get into the finals, then there is no screwing around anymore with that kind of stuff, and it can't break. Now, there might be some minor failures out there, and the sailors are taught how to make quick fixes at the time if a winch goes down. So, but as soon as the boat comes in, the guys get on it and are taking apart winches and things like that, and redoing stuff and checking it over maintenance. And we were very heavily involved in that. And if we had to work 24 hours round the clock to get something fixed, we had to make sure that the boat always was ready to sail that next morning by 9 o'clock. We could not fail ever, or we were dirt.
What kind of a relationship do you have with the captain? I'm thinking of Buddy Melgis, who won the America's Cup.
Really well. Yeah, we were very close with all the sailors and the skippers, you know, and the project managers and the whole thing. I mean, you're part of the team almost.
If you and I decided we're going to enter America's Cup a couple of years from now, what kind of money would we need?
Oh, if you were going to run a syndicate,
you and I decided we're going to put a syndicate together.
100 million.
100 million?
To be equal to the top syndicates, 4 to 5 top syndicates, you would have to be 100 million. It used to be 20, 30, but
is that all?
Yeah, but we've been in it since 1987. You know, and '95 was when we got our breakthrough with the winches, and the Kiwis or the New Zealanders won it. And then from then on, all of our gear, all the hardware we made for the boats, we got pretty lucky, and we pretty well dominated. We got the work for all the syndicates. So it was kind of a big job, because at one time we were doing 22 boats and 11, 12 syndicates and things like that.
Isn't that kind of tricky that you're building for me, and then you're building for him and for him and for him?
Yes,
and
it is. Yeah.
Does somebody say at some point, hey, Peter?
You have to keep a very tight lip. They're very paranoid. They have secret stuff going on. We build custom stuff for them with their design help. That stays with us and with them and can never get out. When we're at bars and stuff, and say in New Zealand or wherever we were, they might try and get you to talk about the other boat or other guys, and you absolutely cannot.
But you must have some skippers or crews or whatever that you like a little better than others. And isn't there a temptation to just sort of slide something into that boat that they're not expecting?
Absolutely, but we don't.
You can't do it.
No, we just say, you know, we have favorite teams, and but we have to be completely neutral outside of the company. And all of our guys, engineers working on this stuff, basically, we don't even talk about the boat's name or syndicate in the company. We refer to numbers. It's a number, this project number. So even our company people all over, you know, we have 150 people there. They don't know what we're working on or so on. All they know is we're working on America's Cup stuff, but they don't know what syndicate, what boat, or anything.
And are you still involved with the America's Cup?
Oh yeah, we did the last 2 boats, a big catamaran and trimaran fight, and then the one before that, that was a big one. We did 11 of the syndicates. We've been doing it really pretty strongly ever since I'd say 87.
Is there a point beyond which you just can't make things lighter? Or no?
No. You know, most inventions have been invented, but what gets something to be built in the next stage is materials. A new material comes on hand that wasn't there before. And so we always think, how much more can you do to a pulley? I mean, a wheel is a wheel and a pulley. I mean, what can you really do to it to make it better each time, you know? And somehow we find it because we discover a new material that allows us to be lighter and less friction or something. And sometimes I always wonder, I say, my God, what's the next step here? Where are we going to get this?
That's what gets you up in the morning. Peter, I'm going to have a whole different view of the next America's Cup that I watch. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for being with us. I hope we'll see you next time as we continue to remember.